Oh, and as always, I forgot to ask, can everybody see the gray screen? It should be a white and gray screen. Everyone see that? Forgot last time there was a bit of a problem. Okay, perfect, good. Jessica? Okay, perfect, good. All right. Yeah, I always forget to ask about that part. All right, so what we're going to work on today is paraphrasing and, of course, quoting. Obviously, a very important aspect of incorporating your sources into the essay. So let's go over kind of the basics, right? So, how do you summarize a summary? Okay, so what is a paraphrase or a summary, right? Or summarizing, paraphrasing. Well, paraphrasing or summarizing, they're kind of synonymous in a way, is how we take larger selections of a text, reduce them to their bare essentials, the key ideas, the main points that are worth noting, remembering. So what are we doing when we paraphrase? Well, we strip away any extra verbiage, extraneous examples, and find the key concepts that, when reworded and shortened, still manage to capture the source's main ideas, crucial details, what's ever necessary for supporting the author's original argument. The problem, of course, is how people say, "Oh, okay, well, summary is put into your own words," right? Well, what does that really mean? Because if we take a thesaurus, and turn it into different words, that's not quite what a paraphrase is. That's technically kind of still plagiarizing. So, it's a little bit more complicated than that kind of superficial idea of, putting everything into your own words. So let's look at a paraphrase example. Suppose we wanted to summarize the passage below. This is a real article from Tap Van's "Watching TV Will Kill You" for an essay. So, this first sentence here. Researchers from the University of Melbourne, Australia, say every hour of TV watching after age 25 cuts almost 2 hours off the viewer's lifespan. So, for the study published in August 15th issue of Royal Journal of Sports Medicine, researchers looked at TV habits of 99,000 Aussies from the decade-long Australian Diabetes, Obesity and Lifestyle Survey, compared with adults who watch no TV, Australians who spend a lifetime average of 6 hours per day in front of the tube, quote, can expect to live 14.3 years less, the authors wrote. Note how TipFan article starts off with the summary of this research. So a lot of times, this is what we're doing, is kind of we're summarizing, re-summarizing, re-quoting from other sources, not even just original sources. But let's say this is what happened with my paraphrase. So, what if my paraphrase looked like this? Research from the University of Melbourne, Australia claimed that every hour of TV watching after 25 cuts 2 hours off a person's lifespan. A study published in an issue of Royal Journal of Sports Medicine reveals that researchers analyzed the TV viewing habits of 99,000 Australians from the decade-long diabetes, obesity, and lifestyle survey, compared with adults who watch no more TV, ones who spend a lifetime average of 6 hours per day in front of the TV, quote, can expect to live 14.3 years less, the authors wrote. Now, this is what actually one student thought was a paraphrase. Obviously, not much has changed. If you go back, there's only a few different key words. So we do much, a paraphrase is important, right? This is almost pretty much directly quoting the previous source. So what's happening here, right? The previous example is a poor paraphrase and qualifies, actually, as plagiarism because paraphrases should be, of course, in your own words. But again, what does that cliche really mean? Well, some words and phrases may stay the same. For example, University of Melbourne, Australian Diabetes, Obesity and Lifestyle Survey. So to paraphrase, you should use your own style, and that's kind of what's more important. Using your own style, your sense of diction, right, to rephrase it. Not just your own words, right, but your own kind of voice, personality behind how you write everything. And so here is a kind of good version. Here's what a former student paraphrased, right? According to research from the University of Melbourne, Australians who spend 6 hours a day watching TV might live 4.3 years less than people who do not watch TV on a regular or daily basis. And there we go. We had two kind of paragraphs, one not long, but we could reduce it into just one sentence. What's the most important information to convey? Well, the 14 years, right? If people who spend 6 hours a day watch TV, 14.3 years less they have to live, right? And that's the significant information. So this one sentence summarizes the important core to the information of Tap Van's article. So what we are doing when we summarize and when we paraphrase, we take a bunch of sources and really reduce them to what is the most key important information. Same thing with this example, though. We can't, of course, put everything into our own words because we're not going to change the University of Melbourne. We can't rewrite 6 hours or 4.3 or 14.3 years, right? We can alter the rest of the content, though, and that's what's important, right? And so putting in your own words doesn't mean you should change the word Australians or the word TV. Instead of 6 hours, you shouldn't rephrase it like 360 minutes, right? Because that would be ridiculous. So it's not just putting into your own words. A summary takes the core important aspect or idea to a source and again just rephrases it into a new sentence, right, that fits your style and all sorts of things. Now, in academic essays, we also of course use quotes for very specific reasons, right, to show our expertise, to participate in academic discussions, to support our claims, right, to give concrete evidence. Besides following proper citation format, which we've gone over, right, and I'm about finished with most of your citation homework. But, besides proper citation, we also have to show where readers can verify our information, and we have to incorporate the quote to suit grammatical structures of our essay sentences. And so we're going to go over a lot of important key grammatical concepts for grammar. The biggest mistake is that a quote cannot be a separate sentence, so always be careful. So if you submitted essay 1 and you're guilty of this, feel free to fix it, right? When it is, it's called the dangling quote, and a dangling quote looks like this. Text messaging has changed many sectors of our daily lives. Now, politics have been forever altered by this technology. And now we have a quote. Quote, in a rare sign of bipartisan unity, the Federal Election Commission unanimously approved a proposal late Monday that will allow federal candidates and campaign committees to accept political donations via text message. End quote. This policy will lead to an increase in political donations and possibly an increase in embezzlement. What's problematic about this sentence, even though, if just hearing it, there's no issue with grammar, the problem is the text-based grammar here, the page-based grammar. The quote should not be its separate sentence. Notice how the quote from Bailey is just a quote without any sort of what we call a signal phrase or an introductory phrase. So what we want to do, right, is always introduce or conclude a quote with what we call a signal phrase that properly places it within a sentence. So we could do something like this. Text messaging has changed many sectors of our daily lives. Now politics have been forever altered by this technology, given how, and then we have, quote, in a rare sign of bipartisan unity, the Federal Election Commission unanimously approved a proposal late Monday that will allow federal candidates and campaign committees to accept political donations via text message. This policy will lead to an increase in political donations and possibly an increase in investment. And so now our quote is actually within the sentence, and that's what's key about quoting. It functions with proper syntax and mechanics now. And note how the I is in brackets, because the original quote was capitalized, but to fit the grammar of our sentence now, we need to lowercase the I, and so we put brackets to do so. And we'll go over that in a moment as well to show other examples. So, another issue with quoting. A quote should not be a separate sentence, and then a quote should also not be the topic sentence. For example, if we started like this, right? Text messaging has changed the political spectrum since, quote, the Federal Election Commission, and the rest of the quote by now. The problem with this is obviously it's not an argument. Even though you're starting off with an argument, texting has changed the political spectrum, the second you put the quote in there, now all of a sudden you're using your example that should support the quote in the actual sentence. And so what you're doing here is you should use the quote to support the topic sentence. The topic sentence itself should not be a quote, because now you're not quite arguing. You're making a small argument, but then immediately giving us a lot of detail. Again, quotes, detail examples should always be within the paragraph itself, never in that first sentence. That first sentence should always have a specific argument to make, and then you back it up with quotes. So again, quotes should support your topic sentence, not function as the claim itself. And so again, back to the previous example as I explained with the brackets and ellipses. So You may need to adjust the capitalization or punctuation in order to incorporate your quote within a sentence. You may also need to add or replace words, for example. Whenever you're changing or adjusting letters or words, you use brackets. So always use brackets to indicate letter or word changes to the quote. So for example, let's say your original source had late Monday. Well, late Monday could mean, any day, right, of each week. And so the problem is if you're writing this 2 weeks from now, late Monday all of a sudden changes, right? So if you had on a source that said something like late Monday, well, then you want to replace it by saying June 11th, 2002, right? Since the original phrase could apply to any week, right? And so you use the brackets to indicate all sorts of changes, right? That, again, in the original quote just needs to be verified for some reason or specified. You could also use ellipses to indicate that for some reason you're leaving out certain words, right? Or quoting from the middle of a sentence, for example. So here are a couple good examples. So let's use the original quote as support, right? So Citizen Kane is perhaps the one American talking picture that seems as fresh now as the day it opened. It may seem even fresher. So here's an original quote from Pauline Kael, who's a very famous film scholar. So let's look at ways to alter the grammar in order to incorporate this quote within sentences. So I could have something like this. Pauline Kael praises Citizen Kane for its modern aesthetics when she states, quote, "It is perhaps the one American talking picture that seems as fresh now as the day it opened." Well, what am I doing here? I'm changing. I don't want to repeat the title Citizen Kane because that's kind of unnecessary. So what I do is I change Citizen Kane in the original quote. I put in brackets, and now I have the word pronoun it. And so this signals that, obviously based on context clues, you could assume that it's talking about the film. But there's just a reason why I'm using it now grammatically. So I'm changing the grammar of the sentence to kind of fit that. Let's say we want a small portion of the quote. So I could say something like this. I agree with Pauline Kael when she claims that Citizen Kane is, quote, as fresh now as the day it opened. So these ellipses, right, just hark back to the fact that I'm taking just a small chunk from the original quote, right? And that's why we have these ellipses. Notice how we can adjust a quote in order to convey the best message in the most appropriate grammatical structure. And so again, it's great to have quotes, right? It's great to, but you have to realize, what do you want? When should you quote and when should you paraphrase, right? And I think that's kind of a key issue. So, as you write your essays, I got a little question here. Yes, actually. Hold on for a second. I'm sorry, what was saying? No, the second one is the same thing. See, Citizen Kane is perhaps one of the, well, and then the second one too. It is perhaps, the only thing I'm changing in the second one is it. And does that make sense? Yeah, could you rephrase the questions? Because, I'm not quite understanding what you're asking now. Alright, so, as you write your essays, you must determine when you should paraphrase or when you should directly quote. Usually, you should paraphrase when the information is important and the way the writer phrased it is super important. Like, that's when you should quote, right? You should paraphrase when the information is good, but the writer, the way he wrote it, just isn't that great, right? So that's a good kind of use of, or way to think about how you could quote versus paraphrase. If there's a sentence where you just absolutely cannot rephrase, right, well, then you quote. Because quotes should include not just important information, but captivating language. It should be something that you as a writer cannot recapture, right? And that's kind of important. And of course, never forget, whether you paraphrase or quote, you always need to cite your source. So there always should be citations. Whether you're paraphrasing or quoting, you always need to cite your source. Whatever ideas are not yours, you always need to cite, and whatever idea is yours, obviously you just argue accordingly. But always be careful, whether you paraphrase or quote, definitely have those citations there. Again, thank you for listening. If you have any questions, always email. If not, enjoy the rest of the week.